As we enter the new year, the year that came before becomes a time for reflection, where we can look back and examine the failings and successes of the past year in its entirety. And when reflecting back and examining 2023, the year might go down as one of the most pivotal years within gaming history, and I don't think that's a stretch to say. Mass layoffs, the reveal of unsustainable AAA budgets, and the quickening of the doom of physical media all happened within 1 year, starting a mass wave of discontent within most gaming communities. But while the industry seemed to be in flames, the games released didn't show any resemblance of that fire. If anything, the year was more of a return to form for gaming, with incredible game after incredible game, making 2023 this weird mashup of remarkable games with the looming destruction of the industry that made them. Today, I want to discuss the problems that occurred during 2023 and what the gaming industry might have to do to not have this become the start of the slow spiraling death of the industry as a whole. I think it's only fitting that I start this off with the plague that is the mass layoffs affecting thousands of people who did or still do work in the gaming industry. While the idea of laying people off is not uncommon for any industry, in fact, the way in which it was handled last year is the problem. Too many developers chose to let go of talent instead of lowering their budgets of their games or even lowering the bonuses and salaries of that of their most paid employees, which are the executives. This idea gaming has of only increasing gaming budgets while then also still paying their executives ridiculous amounts of money for the hard work of the people below them is the industry's biggest problem, in my opinion. Not too long before Christmas, an article came out detailing Bungie's financial issues, and when a developer asked the question, will the executives take a pay cut, the person in the meeting responded with, Bungie isn't that type of company. I understand this is only one company, but I bring this up to bolster my argument that companies are more willing to let go of the people who steer the ship instead of lowering the amount the captain would get for a complete voyage. Moving on from layoffs, I want to touch on something I just said and continue saying about gaming, which at this point is an undeniable fact, that is, the current form of AAA gaming is only going to lead to the destruction of the companies that rely on them. For the longest now, AAA gaming has been held as the pinnacle of the gaming industry, where the highest budgets often resulted in the best quality. But now, with the tools for making games being more accessible than ever, the correlation with budget and quality is almost zero, making the current obsession the AAA space has with only increasing budgets a pretty odd occurrence. In the leaks caused by the Insomniac hack, it was revealed that Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart lost Sony roughly $8 million, and by my account, Rift Apart was a AAA game. Say what you will about the game itself, but it is undeniable in my opinion that Rift Apart was deserving of better. This all goes back to my central point that AAA gaming is a sinking ship, and Sony losing money on a game I thought probably made money is proof of that. Another cause for concern for gaming is the continuing list of studios being closed, and while again not new, the amount closed is the reason for my concern. While I know that some of the studios closed last year were probably going to be closed either way, that doesn't make the unpredictable nature of gaming not a factor in their closure. People want new exciting games with brand new ideas until they get those games and don't support the studios that made them. I know what I just said might come off as a bit odd due to the makers of Saints Row being closed, which was not anything close to what I just said, but it's more the principle of the idea that people don't support the games they say they want. Two prime examples of this exact thing is both Japan and Bend Studios. If people actually wanted a Days Gone 2, then they would have supported the first game more, and the same can be said for Japan Studios. Again, if people cared for IPs like Gravity Rush, The Last Guardian, Knacked and so on, then they would have actually supported those games instead of only knowing them for their work on Bloodborne. Twitter and YouTube impressions and videos do almost nothing for a game if those impressions and videos then don't correlate to sales, which is a sad truth that people seem to not get. Moving on from studio closures to a more agreeable topic, company malpractice is still occurring even in a time where good faith is needed most. You would think that multiple studio failings and closures would have woken people up by now, but that seems to not be the case. Terrible ports to completely unfinished and poorly made games priced at $70 is only half of the sins the gaming industry committed just in 2023. With The Last of Us getting a TV series made by HBO, Sony made a decision to re-release The Last of Us Part 1 with a few graphical improvements to slap the remake label on it to sell it to the new audience they gained from the HBO show, and while that's bad enough, it gets worse. Not only did they sell this remake at full price both on console and PC, but the PC port was almost unplayable for nearly everyone that bought it day one, which seems like a common occurrence these days. I don't know what's sadder at this point, the fact that gaming has got to this place or that people still support developers who partake in these actions. Take for instance Activision and Call of Duty. Every year the same thing happens. People complain about the new release and then buy the thing they criticized not only 4 months after. I'm at a point where I feel comfortable saying the next Call of Duty game could literally look like Roadblocks and run like Gollum, and it would still be the best, or like last year, the second best selling game of that year. I think I just touched upon something that I feel needs more explanation. Gaming has and always will be controlled by the massive IPs it has cultivated over its lifespan. What I mean by this is exactly what I just mentioned prior with Call of Duty. Massive IPs in any form of media have fan bases that seem to not really care for the contents inside but for the IP itself, and that's why you can have circumstances where a game like Pokemon can launch almost unplayable and still be a top bought game that year. I truly believe this is more of a broad problem with people in general. No one currently seems to care for the contents inside the things they buy as long as they scratch an itch they wanted scratching. I understand that most people who play games are just average people wanting a thing to help them de-stress after a day's work, and I'm one of them. But I don't think this attitude of, oh, but I like this IP and it helps me de-stress, gets us anywhere when it comes to actually changing the game or even the industry for the better. I know I'm asking for the almost impossible, but I don't think relying on Twitter and YouTubers to change a game for the better is a realistic expectation. Maybe I'm wrong and the average consumer doesn't care for buggy unfinished messes as long as they're an IP they care for, but I don't think generalizing the average consumer this way is helpful to the grand scheme of holding developers who partake in bad actions accountable. Moving on to a lighter note, 2023 might have been the best year for the games in almost 5 to 6 years. Obviously that's my opinion and you are free to criticize that opinion, but with games like Tears of the Kingdom of Final Fantasy 16 releasing in the same year, what else can I say but last year was outstanding, which makes the potential failing of the industry an even weirder thought. Just take a minute and think about last year of no big story pointing towards an unstable industry released. People like myself would have been saying the complete opposite of what I've been saying in this video. At the end of the day, the games we care for and look to show the health of the industry all had a leak or some kind of drama that pointed to a business becoming outdated within the next 10 years, other than giant games like Call of Duty and GTA, which would be successful no matter the state of the industry. I think this all goes back to something I said in an older video, where as long as gaming has massive IPs that produce billions yearly, it will always be games because of the potential idea of the mass success that giant games bring. In conclusion, the current form of gaming where developers sink years and hundreds of millions to make one game is an outdated model that will break the industry if the developers relying on them continue with their course. Gaming has evolved from what it was 10 or even 20 years ago, where the biggest games with the biggest budgets were essentially the only games on the market, making their success almost fixed. Today, games like Hades and Hollow Knight come out of nowhere, creating massive games which are now massive IPs made on a fraction of anything Sony uses for their budget titles. AAA developers like Sony and such need to come to the understanding that massive budgets don't always result in sales, and becoming more open to the idea of creating lower budget games instead of doing what they could be doing, where they split their games into multiple games released yearly, is the correct option. If something is a problem, finding the root of that problem is how you solve it, not creating a whole new problem, which I think selling games in parts is. If you could take one thing away from this video, it'd be the idea that giant shifts in gaming will have to come to fix the current problems developers are finding themselves in. Games like GTA 6 are only going to prolong the problem due to their almost guaranteed success, making developers believe this model still works when it doesn't. Maybe the end of a massive publisher like Sony needs to come about to have this change happen, but if it even gets to that bad of a place, then the games industry might be truly doomed.